January 4, 1945. Dawn barely touches the frozen ridgelines of the Ardennes. The fog hangs thick, a heavy, muffled curtain swallowing every sound and shadow. Inside a British Sherman Firefly, the crew sits in silence, their breath clouds in the cold air, mingling with the faint vibration humming through the steel floor. Corporal Edward Latham, the gunner, keeps one gloved hand resting on the hull. He closes his eyes. There, a faint tremor, not wind, not distant artillery. A slow, rhythmic pulse crawling through the frozen ground. He knows that rhythm, not from training manuals, but from weeks of living inside this machine, fighting across Europe's mud and ruins. Somewhere in the fog ahead, German Panzers are moving, hidden, waiting. The visibility is zero. No sound carries far enough. Yet through the vibration alone, Latham begins to read the battlefield like Braille, a language of steel and motion. He adjusts the turret slightly. His commander watches in silence. Something unseen is coming, and this time, they'll be ready. The winter of 1944 had become a test of endurance. The Ardennes offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge, had thrown the Allied advance into chaos. German armored divisions, including the feared Panzer IVs and Tiger IIs, had launched a desperate counterattack through the snow-covered forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. For days, the region was swallowed by fog, ice, and confusion. Visibility often dropped to less than 50 meters, and entire units moved blind through the mist. To the Allied tank crews, it was a nightmare. The enemy could be a few hundred yards away, completely invisible, engines muted by the damp air. The German advantage lay in ambush, using terrain, stealth, and superior armor. The British and American forces, pushing forward through narrow roads and frozen villages, faced constant risk from hidden guns and sudden strikes from behind the fog. Sherman crews learned quickly that survival meant adapting beyond doctrine. Maps and compasses became useless when even the nearest tree line vanished into white nothingness. Radio chatter was filled with uncertainty. Coordinates guessed, targets imagined, threats unseen. Crews relied on instinct, sound, and the smallest cues. The smell of burning fuel, the echo of tracks grinding on stone, or a faint tremor felt through the hull. The Sherman Firefly, armed with its long 17-pounder gun, was among the few Allied tanks capable of challenging the German Panthers and Tigers head-on. But that power came with fragility. Thin armor, high silhouette, and dependence on coordination. In open combat, precision and communication mattered. In fog, they meant nothing. Visibility was so poor that gunners couldn't even spot muzzle flashes. The battlefield dissolved into ghostly silence, broken only by the occasional thunder of artillery and the metallic groan of tank engines somewhere unseen. Within this chaos, tank crews developed their own survival habits. Some listened for differences in echoing engine tones, the low growl of a Maybach engine belonging unmistakably to a Panther, the sharp rattle of a Panzer IV. Others learned to sense ground vibration through their machines, a subtle but real phenomenon. Heavy armored movement transmitted faint shocks through frozen soil detectable through a tank's chassis, especially when the engine idled. It wasn't an official technique, not something taught in manuals. It was a battlefield instinct, born from repetition, fear, and the desperate need to know what waited beyond the fog. Corporal Edward Latham was part of the 4th Armored Brigade operating near the Meuse River sector. His unit had been ordered to advance toward the outskirts of Rochefort, a small Belgian town partially retaken by German forces. The previous night they had been hit by hidden anti-tank fire from the woods. 2 Shermans were lost without ever seeing their attackers. The fog had turned the battlefield into a blindfolded duel. By dawn, morale was stretched thin. Crews spoke little, conserving breath in the freezing air. Commanders issued cautious orders: advance by feel, stop frequently, stay silent. The Firefly's 17-pounder was kept trained forward, though no one expected to see anything before it was too late. Latham, though, had noticed something others missed. During the night before, when the tank sat idle, he had felt a distant rhythmic vibration through the hull, a pattern that matched the cadence of tank movement, not artillery. He'd felt it again now, under the fog. To others, it was nothing more than nerves. To him, it was a warning, a signal beneath the silence. It was in moments like this that human instinct replaced technology. The war had produced machines of steel and fire, yet inside them, survival still depended on one's ability to feel the unseen world. And in the thick mist of the Ardennes, that instinct was about to save lives. To understand how a gunner could read vibrations, one must first understand the rhythm of tank warfare. A tank's world was not visual, it was physical. The crew's senses were reduced to touch, sound, and instinct. Inside the cramped steel hull, noise was constant. Engine roaring, gears grinding, shells clanking. Yet beyond that chaos, experienced crews learned to separate familiar tremors from foreign ones. A Sherman idled with a higher pitch, a steady metallic buzz that pulsed through the floor plates. The Panzer IV's engine, by contrast, produced a deeper vibration, slower, heavier, almost like a heartbeat. When the ground froze solid in winter, those vibrations carried for miles. Men who had lived inside these machines for months began to recognize them without sight or sound, only through the fingertips pressed against steel. British and American instructors rarely taught such sensory awareness. The formal doctrine was mechanical: rely on rangefinders, use coordinated spotting, maintain radio discipline. But fog stripped those tools away. What remained was the raw relationship between man and machine, and the earth beneath them. Crews started calling it reading the ground. It wasn't mystical. It was practice, noticing how the tremor changed when engines approached, how it faded when armor stopped, how it pulsed when tracks hit rock or mud. A veteran gunner could tell if the vibration came from friendly engines or enemy armor based on rhythm alone. In late 1944, such instincts mattered more than ever. The German counteroffensive relied heavily on weather. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt and General Hasso von Manteuffel knew Allied air power was their greatest threat. Fog, snow, and overcast skies grounded Allied aircraft, giving German Panzers cover to move freely. The result was a series of devastating ambushes. Allied columns were cut down before they even realized enemy armor was near. Reports from the U.S. 2nd Armored Division mentioned entire platoons destroyed in minutes because visibility dropped below 20 yards. Tank commanders complained that they couldn't even see the ground in front of them. Mines, artillery, and ambushes blended into one continuous fear. Latham's crew had survived such encounters before. In the push through Normandy months earlier, they had seen villages vanish in smoke and confusion. But the Ardennes was different. It wasn't the chaos of battle, it was the absence of it. The silence made every small sound meaningful, every vibration suspect. That morning near Rochefort, the fog was so dense that even silhouettes of nearby tanks were reduced to vague gray shapes. Engines idled softly, muffled by air thick with moisture. Somewhere beyond that white wall, German armor waited, invisible but alive. Latham had his hand against the metal again. His palm felt the faint tremor pulsing beneath, steady, synchronized, deliberate. He knew this wasn't Allied movement. The pattern was too deep, too heavy. It was German. He didn't know how many, he didn't know where, but he knew they were close. Moments like this showed how fragile the line between man and machine had become. A tank gunner was part operator, part sensor, relying on intuition as much as engineering. Every piece of metal vibrated differently under stress. Every sound wave echoed a different truth. The crew around him trusted his eye. Instincts, even if they couldn't explain them. In war, small miracles often went unrecorded, the subtle human senses that technology couldn't measure but often determined survival. What was about to unfold that morning wasn't a planned tactic or a formal engagement. It was a single man's decision, born from experience and fear, the act of trusting the faintest tremor beneath his hand. And when that moment came, it would define the thin line between being the hunter or the hunted. Inside the fog, human senses became sharper, stretched by fear and necessity. For Latham, the battlefield no longer existed through sight. It lived in texture, the trembling steel beneath his hand, the pulse in his own chest syncing with the tank's idle hum. Every man in that Firefly was tense, listening to the silence. The loader's breath was shallow, the commander's hand gripped the hatch edge, knuckles pale under leather gloves. Fear didn't scream here, it whispered. The crew knew one mistake, one unseen shot, would end everything in seconds. Yet amid that fear was trust. Latham's commander didn't question his instinct, he simply waited, because in war, there were moments when machines failed, radios jammed, and visibility vanished, leaving only the thin line of human intuition to bridge the unknown. Fog had rewritten the rules of tank combat. Visibility was the heart of armor warfare, But now, even a few meters felt like an abyss. Commanders couldn't rely on coordinated fire, and scouts became useless. The battlefield became auditory, tactile, intimate. A single Sherman might be only yards from a German Panzer and never see it. For both sides, patience became the deadliest weapon. Whoever moved first risked revealing themselves. The Germans often waited, their panzers silent, engines off, guns trained toward the faint sounds of Allied tracks. The British, forced to advance, crept forward in silence, scanning for invisible threats. That was why Latham's awareness was invaluable. When every instrument failed, vibration became information. It was a primitive radar, felt through steel and soil. He didn't just sense movement, he could read direction and rhythm. Each pulse through the hull told him where the enemy breathed in the fog. And when that invisible tension reached its breaking point, the next few seconds would decide everything. Tanks were machines of steel, but they were also conduits of information. Every movement, every engine vibration transmitted through the chassis and tracks. For gunners like Latham, the Firefly's hull became more than armor. It was a sensor array. The 17-pounder gun could punch through Panther armor, but its value depended entirely on accurate targeting. Impossible in zero visibility. Instead, Latham relied on vibrations. The frozen Ardennes soil transmitted weight and motion, revealing hidden panzers long before optics could. Technology in this case wasn't the gun or the gene. It was the human-machine interface. Leadership in these moments was subtle, almost invisible. Latham's commander knew that decisions had to balance patience and aggression. Too hasty, and the crew risked revealing their position. Too cautious, and enemy tanks could strike first. Trust and experience became leadership's currency. The unit deferred to Latham's instincts, recognizing that rigid tactics were worthless in the fog. Command wasn't about orders. It was about allowing skilled soldiers to act when the world itself had disappeared. German commanders exploited the fog with precision. Their panzers moved quietly, using the mist as a cloak. Ambush was the doctrine. Every motion calculated to force the Allies into reaction. Yet even the most disciplined unit had limitations. Engines, even idling, transmitted vibrations through frozen ground. German crews, confident in concealment, were vulnerable in ways they could not perceive. One subtle mistake, an uneven pause in movement, a slight shift in weight, could reveal their position to a trained observer. In war, instinct blurs with survival. Latham's skill raises questions about human perception under extreme conditions. Could one man's intuition decide life or death? In this instance, the moral weight fell on a single decision: to act on what he felt rather than what he saw. The fog concealed enemy tanks, yet it could not hide the consequences of hesitation. War often turns abstract principles into raw sensory decision. And in those seconds, morality is measured in the balance between courage and caution. December 21st, 1944, the fog hung low over the Ardennes, thick enough to swallow entire battalions in silence. The Firefly sat motionless on a frozen rise near Rochefort, treads sinking slightly into icy mud. Latham's hand pressed against the hull, feeling the vibrations crawl beneath him. Slow at first, then steady, unmistakably armored movement. Not allied, not distant. Close, too close. He signaled the commander with a subtle tap, pointing toward the invisible threat. The officer nodded, silent. The gunner didn't need confirmation. Every instinct screamed. The enemy was waiting in the fog, their panzers lying in ambush, engines muting any sound of approach. The first tremor sharpened. Latham's eyes, half closed, traced an invisible path across the mist. The vibrations revealed a pattern. The staggered advance of 3 German tanks moving in coordination, their tracks crunching ice and mud. Each subtle pulse told him distance, weight, even orientation. In that frozen silence, the Firefly became more than a tank. It became a human sensor, attuned to the rhythm of steel and earth. The crew held their breath. No one spoke. Outside, the fog shifted with the wind, carrying neither sight nor sound, only faint, almost imperceptible shocks through the soil. Latham adjusted the turret slowly, feeling each micro-vibration through his fingertips. Then the decision came. He aimed where the rhythm indicated the lead Panther would appear. No line of sight, no visual confirmation, only the pulse through steel and ground, every second stretched like an eternity. The moment of action would determine survival, not just for him, but for the entire unit. He squeezed the trigger. The shell left the 17-pounder silently, cutting through fog and fear alike, racing toward a target he could only sense. Time seemed to freeze as the vibration continued beneath him, the fate of the unseen enemy now in motion. The shell struck with a muted roar, invisible in the fog but devastating in effect. The lead Panther erupted in a plume of smoke and fire, its engine dying in a metallic scream. The vibration through the ground shifted, sudden, chaotic, no longer steady. Latham felt it through the hull, two more tanks now reacting, their coordinated rhythm broken. The Firefly's crew remained tense. Another pulse approached from the right. Latham adjusted the turret again, guided solely by the tremors beneath him. He fired a second round. Another explosion, another enemy machine incapacitated. Smoke and fire rose in ghostly columns, swallowed immediately by the mist. To anyone watching, the battlefield was still invisible. Yet death had already moved through it. German crews, relying on the fog as cover, were caught unaware. Their silent advance turned to confusion. Engines revved, tracks skidded over ice, vibrations erratic. The rhythm Latham had sensed, steady, controlled, was replaced by panic. One by one, the hidden panzers revealed themselves through their desperate movements. By the time visibility improved slightly with the rising sun, the ambush had failed. 3 German tanks lay disabled, scattered across the frozen forest floor. The Firefly's crew exhaled collectively, still silent, still wary. Survival had hinged not on sight or rangefinders, but on a man's ability to feel the battlefield. After the engagement, official reports credited Latham's unit with destroying the Panther platoon, but the records could not capture the unusual skill that made it possible. No radar, no scouts, no conventional spotting, only vibration, instinct, and the quiet courage to act. In the Ardennes, that morning became a lesson whispered among crews. The fog could conceal, but it could not hide mistakes from those who felt the enemy. And in a war defined by steel, fire, and sight, sometimes the most human senses proved the deadliest weapon of all. The immediate aftermath was a mixture of relief and disbelief. Latham's crew remained huddled inside the Firefly, frost stiffening their movements, hearts still racing. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the frozen devastation of the ambush site. 3 German Panzers lay crippled, their silhouettes grim against the snow. Track marks in the ice told the story. A coordinated advance stopped dead by a single man's perception. Commanders on both sides took notice. British reports described the incident as an extraordinary example of situational awareness, though formal recognition of vibration reading did not exist in manuals. Latham's gunner log, however, detailed the timing and sequence of shots with precision. The official commendation noted skill and bravery, but it could not fully convey the nature of the encounter. A battle fought in silence, without sight, where instinct replaced instruments. The German side recorded the loss as another failure of surprise. Their Panther platoon had intended to strike a vital advance route, hoping to isolate a column of Shermans. Yet the sudden destruction of their lead tank caused hesitation, confusion, and retreat. Small units scattered, morale shaken. Survivors reported a silent, unseen force striking before they could react. In private journals, several tank commanders admitted they had felt something unnatural in the soil, vibrations they could not explain. For the wider Allied forces, the engagement reinforced lessons learned during the Ardennes, that fog and terrain could neutralize even the most advanced armor. Crews were encouraged to trust instinct alongside technology. A gunner who could feel the ground might detect what optics could not. Commanders began to emphasize observation of subtle cues, engine patterns, track pressure, and tremors transmitted through frozen soil. The Ardennes campaign continued with its relentless winter struggle, but moments like this became legends among armored units. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones of the Firefly crew that had faced invisible panzers, a story of survival dictated by human perception as much as by steel. In the days following the engagement, the significance of Latham's actions became clearer. Military analysts began to study the encounter, noting how a single gunner's ability to sense enemy movement could alter the outcome of an ambush. Training programs incorporated lessons on tactile awareness, emphasizing the value of experience and sensory perception when technology failed. While not official doctrine, the anecdote influenced tactics in low-visibility operations. For the crew, life returned to the rhythm of patrols and skirmishes, but the memory lingered. The Firefly that had seen in the fog became a symbol of human adaptability in armored warfare. Fellow tankers recounted the story to reinforce morale, a reminder that courage and attention to detail could turn the tide even when machines and manuals were rendered useless. German forces, meanwhile, adapted cautiously. Patrols advanced with more hesitation, aware that the Allies were learning to detect even the faintest signals. The psychological impact of being discovered in complete concealment weighed heavily. Commanders emphasized coordination and silence, but the fear of unseen detection became a constant strain. Ambushes required more planning, yet the advantage of fog, once absolute, had been challenged. Historically, the encounter exemplifies a subtle but critical evolution in tank warfare. Beyond firepower, armor relied increasingly on perception and anticipation. Soldiers' ability to interpret environmental feedback, vibrations, sounds, and shadows became an unofficial but vital skill. These small human elements complemented technology, ensuring that warfare was never purely mechanical. By the end of the Ardennes campaign, accounts of similar incidents surfaced across multiple divisions. Soldiers learned that machines could amplify human senses but could not replace them. Latham's moment, frozen in fog and steel, symbolized the intersection of instinct, technology, and survival. It was not celebrated in headlines, but among those who understood the battlefield, it became legendary. A reminder that in war, the unseen could be detected and the invisible could be defeated. The fog of the Ardennes did more than conceal enemy tanks. It revealed the limits of technology and the boundless capacity of human perception. In that frozen morning, Latham's hand on steel beacon, a bridge between instinct and warfare, he acted not with sight, not with instruments, but with an understanding born of experience, patience, and acute awareness. It was a skill forged in months of repetition, fear, and survival. A reminder that in war, machines amplify the senses, but do not replace them. This incident reflects a broader truth about combat. Victory often hinges on the subtle interplay between human intuition and mechanical power. Tanks are instruments of destruction, yet their effectiveness is inseparable from the men inside. In zero visibility, the battlefield shifts from a landscape of sight to a network of vibrations, echoes, and tremors, a world where decision-making depends as much on feeling as on knowledge. Historically, moments like Latham's reveal how warfare evolves not only through new technology but through adaptation. Armored units began to appreciate that low-visibility operations required more than firepower. They demanded sensory awareness and trust in human instinct. One gunner's perception altered outcomes, saved lives, and offered lessons that would quietly influence armored tactics in the months and years to come. Above all, it reminds us that in the chaos of battle, humanity persists. A man listening to the rhythm of the ground beneath him became the decisive factor. The fog could hide tanks, the terrain could mask movement, but it could not mask the presence of vigilance, skill, and courage. In war, what cannot be seen can sometimes be felt, and what is felt can change the course of history.